Welcome, Bruchim Abbaim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuali. And as promised, today we are going to be talking about hell. Now, depending on your background, this might qualify as difficult material. That's why last week I filmed a video on how to process difficult material. It'll be one of the first links in the description down below. So go ahead and check that out. This might be difficult for a variety of reasons. 58% of Americans, as of a 2014 Pew survey, believe in a literal hell as a place, quote, where people who have led bad lives and die without being sorry are eternally punished. And I'm going to be taking hell somewhat less literally, so that could make this a very difficult video to get through. And on the other hand, there are people who simply find the fact that I'm going to be deconstructing a lot of Christian and Jewish narrative in order to get through this. We're going to find that a little uncomfortable as well. So if this is going to be touching on subjects that are a little bit tough, then I recommend you hit the video down below first and then join me back again and watch the rest of this one. So the question that hopefully comes to mind is, why even bother doing a video on hell? And my first answer for you is Richard Wagner. No, I'm not making a case he's the devil, and I'm not making a case that sitting through the 5+ hours of Parsifal is hell. I actually quite enjoy it. That's a different discussion for a completely different day. The reason I bring up Richard Wagner is because he changed the game. He changed the game so much that everyone either had to do what he did or react against him. And people either had to compose like Wagner or very deliberately react and try to be an anti-Wagner. And those were the two movements, the Wagnerite and the anti-Wagnerite movements. Not going to go much deeper into that one, but hell is actually kind of the same thing. If we have it as a concept, and in the Western world, influenced by Christianity especially, people either believe it's a real thing, like I said, 58% of Americans in a 2014 survey, or they're reacting against it as if it's a real thing, rejecting the thing as it's presented. And so I want to kind of go around the side there. I don't want hell to be like Wagner. I want to give us a third option. I don't want us to be stuck in this false dichotomy of we're either dealing with hell as a real thing or we're reacting against it as if it's a real thing. Second, I want us to be able to use hell as a metaphor. And that's kind of hard if somewhere deep down inside we've been programmed to look at the dogmatic aspects of hell, believing in a literal place of torment as opposed to something that we can look at figuratively. I want us to start understanding that everything that comes down to us today came to us via a very long and oftentimes very understandable, very human, a recognizable process. So first of all, let's just get it right out there. Let's actually look at some of the visuals. I'm just going to flash them across the screen right now. When we think of hell, this is what we're thinking of. And this we are stuck with because 700 years ago, many of these images were inspired by Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy, which published in 1320. This vision, this concept, this idea of hell really came from a single person's amazing imagination. Now, here's Botticelli, here is William Blake, here is Delacroix, here is Salvador Dali, and these are all different visions that we can relate to. Look at the torment and the pain and the fire, and then that leads to these other images from today. Now, this isn't accidental. There is a reason that Dante saw these visions, and you can look all over the writings of the first centuries of the Christian era, but really it goes back to the Gospels. And yes, I know I'm a rabbi, I know this is a Jewish channel, but unless we actually understand the interplay between religions and how we borrow from each other, we're never going to be able to have honest conversations about this material. So I've created a kind of conglomeration of some of the doctrinal statements that most fundamentalist Christians are not going to argue with me on, and they're quotes, a whole bunch of them down below. When I do quote from the Christian Bible on this channel, it's going to be almost always from the Net Bible, the New English Translation. It's meant for online. It's very scholarly. It's incredibly well done. It's incredibly well footnoted. The translation is brilliant. So the first point is that hell is a place, and it's a place specifically for punishment. And the quote is from Matthew 8:12. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Sounds very Hollywood. Well, that's where that comes from. The second point is that hell is eternal and for the wicked. The quote is from Matthew 25:41. Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." And continuing in Matthew 25:46, "And there will go away into these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteousness into eternal life." And then the final point, that when you're in hell, you're conscious, according to this particular doctrine. And the quote is from Revelation 14:11, "The smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night." Now, let's put this all together for a second, because we've got the ideas of punishment and whatnot, but I want to really focus on kind of the physical motion involved, because when we look through, especially as we start getting now into the Tanakh, into the Jewish texts, I want us to think of these other ideas that we associate with hell, because in addition to the hellfire and all that, there's constantly this descending into the place, right? This place of punishment. And other words that we see sometimes for punishment are corruption, terror. So let's just hold on to that thought for a second, and let's jump a little bit deeper into this. The actual evolution of these ideas is, I think, much more interesting than any of the dogma that comes down. So I'm going to give you a few keywords. So I hope it's no surprise that the word hell does not appear in the Tanakh. If you're coming from a Christian standpoint, the word hell does not appear in the Old Testament. You will see it in the King James Version over and over again. You will see translations using the word hell. That is not what the Hebrew is saying. End stop. Here are the various words that you are going to encounter. You're going to see the word Sheol. The literal translation of that is a holding place for the dead. You're going to see Bor, which is a pit, a literal place, a hole that's dug. Abaddon, which means ruin, as in a ruined city. You're going to see Shachat, which means corruption or putrefaction. And then it doesn't seem like hell at all, but the other word for afterlife that is used. It's never translated as hell, but we have to put this in here to understand that when we're dealing with afterlife in the Tanakh, it is coming from a different place, and it's Vayesef Elamav, and he, I'm using this in the male voice here, was gathered with his ancestors. I want us to remember for a second this idea of, again, descending, right? We consider, get it from the Christian tradition, Jesus descending into hell, so that word comes over and over again into this place, this physical place. So let me just grab a few texts from the Tanakh that have the word Sheol in it. I'm going to have to squint a little bit here because I printed my Hebrew way too small. First one from Genesis 37:35, and this is Jacob upon finding that his son Joseph has died. Of course, he hasn't died. He's been beaten, thrown into a pit, and he has been schlepped off eventually to Egypt, according to the narrative. And we read, "Vayikumu chobna vechol benotav lenachamo v'yamain lehit nachem vayomer ki ered el beni avel she'ola." So all of his sons and his daughters came to comfort him, and Jacob said to them, "I am going to descend, ki ered el b'nei, to my son Avel, to mourn him, she'olah, in the direction of Sheol." The translation I have here is, "No, I will go down mourning to my son in Sheol." Now, this can be translated as, "I will go down to mourn my son in hell." It is absolutely makes no sense contextually there whatsoever. Second text, very different, quite fascinating. So this is from the story of Korok. Korok, I know I'm going to do an entire video on Korok at some time in the future, so just enjoy that and go read the story of Korok. This is coming from Numbers 16:30, and Moses is speaking after the sin of Korok, and he says, "V'im b'ri'ah Yivra Adonai, ufatzta ha'adama et piha, uv'al'a otam ve'et kol asher lahem, ve'yardu chayim she'ola." So once again, we see the word for yared, for to descend, and the translation here, "If the Eternal brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up, and they go down alive into Sheol." So again, translated as hell in some traditions, but is that the hell that we understand? We do have descending, we do have a place. Interesting, the aspect of alive, and the image that we have from Parshat Korach is of the earth opening and people being swallowed by the earth. The final quote is from Yonah. I love this one. This is Yonah speaking from inside the Dag Gadol, inside the belly of the great fish. And we read, Vayomer karati matzara li el Adonai vayaneni mi beten sheol shemati koli. And Yonah said, in my time of trouble I called to the Eternal, and the Eternal answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried out, and you heard my voice. Now, he says he's crying out from Sheol. In this case, he's crying out from a place where he knows he's going to die, a holding place for the dead. Literally, in this case, the belly of a great fish. Now, I'm going to bring in the King James translation for a bit here because I want us to hear the language that really affected us as we grew into our understanding, for good or for ill, of what Christianity or Judaism or this tradition combined actually is. And I'm going to throw in some of these other words that we looked at here. The Hebrew will be linked down below. I'm just going to do the translation now from Isaiah 14:15. We have, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. We get both Sheol and Bor in that one. So, Ech el Sheol torad, I shall bring you down into Sheol, the holding place for the dead. But then we have to the sides of the pit. And when we hear that, what images are we starting to get? Another good one for great images of punishment from the book of Job, chapter 28-22. Destruction and death say, we have heard the fame thereof with our ears. And the word for destruction here is Abaddon. Abaddon, again, ruin, something that's being destroyed. Again, kind of falls into the idea of eternal torment. So a completely different set of these words here from Isaiah 38:17. Behold, for peace I had great bitterness, but thou hast in love to my soul delivered it from the pit of corruption. The word that is used here is me, from shachat. So a pit of corruption is how King James translates that one. And then I just want to throw in this last image because it's important, this idea of being gathered to the ancestors. And this is Abraham at his time of death. This is from Genesis 25:8. And Abraham expired and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Vayasef el amav. So we hear these words, corruption and pit and descending, and it fits into everything that we learned from Dante and all the images that came from it, but that's exactly not what the Tanakh is talking about. As a matter of fact, the Tanakh is talking about something incredibly literal, but not a literal place of torment. So I'm going to throw up a picture here. Now, this is good fun. I've got pictures of myself doing the same thing. This is from a First Temple time tomb. If you actually go to Jerusalem today, this is right below St. Andrew's Church. It's right near the Menachem Begin Center. And it's not super easy to visit, but you can visit it. And just notice what those people are doing, laying on that slab there. And you notice the hole going deep down into the earth. Now, in order to actually visualize this, you have to understand that the place where these people are laying their heads on a slab, that slab has head-sized indentations there. So you're kind of compelled to actually lay down in it. It's macabre, literally from the grave, mikaver. It's macabre to do it, but that's what you do when you visit this place. But this outer room where these people are laying down, that used to be a covered tomb. That was also a cave. That's dissipated over time. And here's how it worked. In the First Temple times, when you died, you were wrapped up in a cloth, not too different than what we do today in a Chavakadisha, and then the body was laid on these slabs, the head's placed exactly where the guide tells them, lay the head right here. And what do you think happens to a body in the desert air over the course of several months? It desiccates, it dries out. And so what do? You then come in at some point in the future and you take the body or the bodies, these would probably be family tombs, and you take all the bones that are all that's left and you dump them into the lower pit. So what happens when you are placed in your grave? Your body becomes corrupt. Abadan. What happens after that? You descend into the holding place for all the bones. Guess what that is called? Sheol. And what happens? You are gathered with all of your ancestors. Literally, because that's where all of your ancestors are. Now, we're not quite done yet. And yes, I'm excited because this is cool stuff. Come on. This is amazing. This entire idea of hell originally began with something that was technical, that was literal. Read these verses again. Go back and rewatch the video. Save my soul from the pit. In other words, I'm standing on the edge of about to be dead. Save me. Listen to the words from this psalm, from Psalm 88, that combine several of these aspects. Kishav avra ot nafshi v'chaye lish'ol higiu, for I am sated with misfortune. I am at the brink of Sheol. Continuing on, I am numbered with those who go down into the pit. Continuing, abandoned among the dead like bodies lying in the grave, of whom you are mindful no more, and who are cut off from your care. Why? Because in the Tanakh, the Eternal is concerned with the living, not the dead. Once I'm dead, the Eternal is not worried about me. Why? Because the entire purpose of the Tanakh is to build a living relationship with the Eternal. What happens after the living is unimportant in the Tanakh. The word bor, pit, coming back one more time. You have put me at the bottom of the pit, in the darkest places, in the depths. Remember that picture? I'll flash it up there again. Your fury lies heavy upon me. You afflict me with all of your breakers. Selah. We'll have an entire video about Selah one of these days, by the way. Okay, we're not done yet, because that's just the thesis. We still have the antithesis to throw in here to fully understand where we get all of these images that you have to admit that the Matthew and the Revelation images are still slightly more intense, and none of these images include fire and smoke. So where did that come from? So with that I say, welcome to hell. Yeah, what you're looking at right now, this is hell. I've seen a few concerts there. It's pretty cool. I actually used to live a few blocks just on the other side of where you're looking at right now, but here it is. So it helps to understand a little bit of the topography of Jerusalem to know where this is. You should visit Jerusalem. I highly recommend it. But this is in between the old city. Right behind that picture off to the right would be the King David Hotel. And then you would go through that valley and eventually hit the walls of the old city, the Jaffa Gate, which is leading into the Christian quarter and the Armenian quarter. And this valley has an artist colony in it today, and there's a shopping mall right when you get up to the top, and it's quite modern. But that's not what it was used for back in the day. So back in the Second Temple times, and back around the time of the formation of the earliest Christian narrative, this was actually a place where people who weren't necessarily worshiping in the temple, shall we say, were making sacrifices to their old gods or their own gods. And this weren't just people from outside of Judaism. These were also people from within Judaism, because in Judaism, our tradition has a fascinating evolution that I will get into in a different video. But suffice to say, how did sacrifices work in the First and Second Temple times? Most likely these practices went back much further into the First Temple times. We just have much less archaeological evidence about what happened then. But if you were to worship a god in that part of the world, you would make sacrifices in the morning, and then a different kind of sacrifice in the afternoon. And then all night long, you would take all the remains of those sacrifices, put them on the altar where you sacrificed the animals, and you burn it all night long. That's actually called in Judaism the Korban Avit. So imagine looking out from Jerusalem over the valley that I just showed you, and at nighttime, you have the entire valley filled with fire and smoke. And you can imagine, because this wasn't the God that people were supposed to be worshiping, that you would look out and say, this is where all the bad people go. Literally. And what's the name of this place? Well, this is the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. Hinnom, or Gehenna, in Aramaic. And that's where we actually get Gehenna, the word that's translated in the Greek versions of the Bible into hell. Mix those two items together, that death is that place where you're absent from God, because again, the Tanakh wasn't concerned about what happened after death, it was concerned what we do during life. So keep me from being distant from you as I go into Sheol was a literal keep me alive, because my enemies surround me, but when I'm dead, I go down into a pit where my body becomes literally corrupted, along with the bodies of all of my family around me. And now take a deep breath, because that, for some of us, was going to be a not very pleasant experience. All right, we're almost all through this. We go to the question from the beginning, why should we even care? Well, there are implications to looking at this. The original idea was not meant to be torment or punishment. It was a literal description matched then with a theological problem, people not worshiping the way that the ruling hegemony believed that they should worship. Well, the implication, the first one, is being aware of how we backward project our images today onto texts. In other words, when I first read the text about going down into the pit, into corruption, descending down into a place of the dead, we visualized Christians, Jews, non-believers, non-affiliated, pagans. We were still reacting to the word hell as it's come down to us in Western society. In other words, by not being aware of where this comes from, we heard those words and we saw a place of fire and punishment, even though that's not what the words meant originally at all. And how many times, if we do it with this one image, do we project what we think we know today onto something that wasn't meant to mean that at all? Second, I think even bigger, once we can recognize that, we can begin recognizing much better when someone tries to put us under their control. How many people have been promised, if they misbehaved, and I use that word in a very broad sense, misbehave religiously, misbehave personally, how many people have had someone warn them, if they did not believe in the right way, that they were going to go to a literal place of punishment? And the answer is an awful lot of people, and probably a lot of people who are watching this video over time. And one of the ways to escape a pit that someone throws you into is to be aware that it's there before someone has the chance to throw you in there. And finally, and most importantly for this channel, understanding this is a gateway to opening up all of our traditions. Instead of being trapped by what someone else tells us our tradition is, we have the opportunity to slowly become free. The Christian tradition says, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Well, the truth is actually understanding how these things came to be. And by doing this, we become, free to be in dialogue with the eternal, as opposed to dialogue with that which is greater than us through someone who has an agenda. I'm guessing that a lot of people who would try to place us in hell don't necessarily have our best interests in mind when they do that. Which brings us to my final 2 points. First of all, in reality, hell is political. It's polemic. I'm going to throw another image up there, and I want you to look carefully. I'll put this over the full screen. This is called the Kepler Rapid Transit to Sheol. This is by Joseph Ferdinand from 1888. This is another version of hell. I want you to take a good look at who is on this rapid transit. Some of these could probably reflect today. We've got the society car. I think that that's what that's supposed to be spelling out. We do have the clerical scandal car. None of us have ever had to think of those ideas at all. I do love the artist's car back there. Just take a good look at this and enjoy this one. We do have some typical devils and demons. Of course, all of these are stolen images from other ideas, other cultures, other gods, and maybe one of these days I will talk about the origin of the concept of the devil. Not today. But take a look at the familiar imagery, but take a look at what's actually happening here. Because someone is making a statement about who belongs in Sheol, who's going to hell. And it's the image of an artist, or it's being sarcastic. But whatever, it has nothing to do with lifting people up. Which brings me to the final point that will pivot us to next week's video. That's hell is personal. So I haven't gotten into at all how Judaism views hell. And yes, hell is talked about in Judaism. The reality is in Judaism, it's complicated, like almost everything else. But I'll give this little hint for the week to come. Hell's personal. It's individual. In other words, much of Hasidic Jewish thought is centered around that we are able to, with our actions, to create hell around us. You can look at it practically with how we're talking to each other today. Is this really a heaven that we're creating with our actions, with our words, with the way that we talk to each other as we try to feed the god Moloch out in the valley of Hinnom and then burn those sacrifices all night long? Is that really a positive existence that we're creating around us? But this is all individual choice. Every time we sit there and say, it doesn't matter, I'm anonymous and I can go ahead and rip someone apart, that is a type of hell that we're creating. We can understand this now as something that's not external, but internal, only when we fully internalize the idea that the way that we think of hell, whether we believe in it or whether we are reacting against what others believe in, has nothing to do with anything that we should be too worried about. What we should be worried about is understanding that our traditions are complicated, that we as humans are complicated, that we are in a constant wrestling match with the divine to come up with a better society, to become better people. And in the act of doing so, oftentimes we try to rip other people down and control them through these actions. That's today what the creation of hell is. So once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending this time with Beit Virtuali. Hopefully these videos mean something to you. If so, we need your support. Please become a Patreon, link down below. If you don't know what Patreon is, send me an email, baitvirtuali@gmail.com. I'm happy to chat with you about it. We're trying to do something different here. It's a different model of Jewish education, so we don't exactly have a simple funding model like if we were a brick and mortar synagogue. But if you want to support us, please become a Patreon. Or if you can't do that, then like, subscribe, comment, pass this on to others until we become much bigger with much more views. We can't sustain ourselves over time. So if you enjoy these videos, please become a part. Please let us know what you think. Please ask questions so we have some stuff for when we put our first podcast out in the next week or so, as soon as we get our technology up and running. And when we start our services, I will try to be in dialogue with these questions as well. Take care, everyone. Remember, spend a little bit of time lifting each other up. In doing so, we lift all of us up at the same time. See you next time.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים אותנו למדת. תורה ומצוות חוקים